when solitude becomes your greatest teacher. Have you ever noticed how desperately we flee from silence? How we fill every empty moment with noise, distraction, or the presence of others? We scroll through endless feeds, turn on background music, or reach for our phones the instant we're left with our own thoughts. But what if this very avoidance is keeping us from discovering something profound? Most of us confuse being alone with loneliness, treating solitude as a punishment rather than a gift. We've been conditioned to believe that happiness comes from connection with others, that fulfillment requires external validation, and that being by ourselves means something is fundamentally wrong. This misconception has created a generation of people who are terrified of their own company, constantly seeking outside themselves for what can only be found within. The question isn't whether you can tolerate being alone. It's whether you can discover the difference between loneliness and true solitude. Can you distinguish between the ego's desperate need for company and consciousness's natural state of wholeness? Can you recognize when you're running from yourself versus when you're returning home to yourself? Here lies the trap. We mistake the ego's discomfort with aloneness for a genuine need for others. The ego, that constructed sense of self built from memories, roles, and identities, cannot survive in true solitude. It needs constant reinforcement, validation, and interaction to maintain its illusion of existence. So it creates the experience of loneliness, that aching sense of separation, to drive us back into the familiar patterns of seeking, grasping, and depending on external sources for our sense of completeness. This exploration will reveal how true aloneness is not the absence of connection, but the presence of everything. You'll discover that what you've been calling loneliness is actually the ego's death throes. And what lies beyond that dissolution is a state of being so complete, so whole, that it needs nothing external to validate its existence. The illusion of separation. Loneliness is the ego's masterpiece, a carefully constructed emotional state that keeps us trapped in the illusion of separation. When we feel lonely, we're experiencing the ego's interpretation of aloneness through the lens of lack, abandonment, and incompleteness. It's the mind's way of saying, something is missing, someone should be here, this emptiness needs to be filled. But this interpretation is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what we actually are. The ego exists only in relationship, to memories, to other people, to roles and identities, to future goals and past achievements. It's like a mirror that can only see itself when there's something to reflect off of. Remove all the external references and the ego begins to panic. It doesn't know how to exist without something to push against, something to define itself in relation to. This panic manifests as loneliness, that desperate reaching for connection, that sense that we're incomplete without others. But true aloneness reveals something entirely different. It's not the absence of others. It's the absence of the one who needs others. When the ego's constant commentary quiets down, when its endless demands for validation fade away, what remains is not emptiness but fullness, not isolation but integration, not separation but unity with everything that is. Think of it like this. Loneliness is like being a wave that has forgotten it's part of the ocean. The wave looks around and sees other waves and thinks, I need those other waves to feel complete. But when the wave realizes its true nature, that it was never separate from the ocean to begin with, the need for other waves disappears. It doesn't become isolated from other waves. It realizes that the distinction between waves was always an illusion. In true aloneness, there's no one left to be lonely. The very mechanism that creates the experience of loneliness, The ego's sense of being a separate self that needs external completion dissolves. What remains is pure awareness, pure presence, pure being. And this presence is not empty. It's pregnant with infinite possibility. It's not lacking. It's overflowing with completeness. This is why people who have touched true solitude often describe it as the most connected they've ever felt. They're not connected to other people in the usual sense, through shared experiences, conversations, or mutual dependencies. They're connected to the source from which all people, all experiences, all phenomena arise. They've found a common ground that underlies all apparent differences. The shift from loneliness to true aloneness is like the difference between being a homeless person looking for shelter and being someone who realizes they've been carrying their home with them all along. The homeless person experiences lack, desperation, and the constant need to find something external to provide security. But the person who realizes they are their own home experiences freedom, completeness, and the ability to be at peace anywhere. This realization doesn't happen through thinking about it or trying to convince yourself that you don't need others. It happens through direct experience, through sitting with the discomfort of aloneness long enough for the ego's protests to exhaust themselves, through staying present with the silence until you realize that the silence is not empty but full, through remaining still until you discover that stillness is not the absence of movement, but the source from which all movement arises. When this shift occurs, being alone is no longer something you tolerate or endure. It becomes something you treasure, not because you're avoiding others or because you've become antisocial, but because you've discovered a state of being so complete, so fulfilling, that it doesn't depend on external circumstances for its continuation. You've found the place within yourself that is always home, always whole, always enough. Practice sitting with the discomfort of aloneness. In the first week, begin by setting aside just 15 minutes each day to sit completely alone without any distractions. No phone, no music, no books, no tasks to complete. Simply sit in a comfortable position and allow yourself to be present with whatever arises. This isn't meditation in the traditional sense. You're not trying to achieve any particular state or follow any specific technique. You're simply practicing being alone with yourself. During these first sessions, you'll likely encounter intense discomfort. Your mind may race with thoughts about things you should be doing, people you should be contacting, or problems you should be solving. You might feel anxious, restless, or overwhelmingly bored. This is the ego's initial reaction to being stripped of its usual distractions and sources of stimulation. Don't try to fight these feelings or make them go away. Simply observe them with curiosity, as if you're a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon. Notice how your mind creates stories about why this discomfort is happening. It might tell you that you're wasting time, that this is pointless, or that you should be doing something more productive. It might create urgency around checking your messages or completing tasks. Recognize these as the ego's attempts to pull you back into its familiar patterns of seeking and doing. The key is not to believe these stories or act on them, but simply to witness them arising and passing away. In the second week, extend your alone time to 30 minutes and begin to notice the subtle ways you avoid true aloneness, even when you're physically by yourself. You might catch yourself mentally rehearsing conversations, replaying memories, or planning future activities. These mental activities are forms of internal company, ways the mind keeps itself occupied to avoid the direct experience of pure presence. When you notice these mental patterns, gently return your attention to the simple fact of being here, now, alone. Pay attention to the physical sensations that arise during these sessions. You might notice tension in your chest, a fluttering in your stomach, or a general sense of unease throughout your body. These are the physical manifestations of the ego's discomfort with aloneness. Instead of trying to relax these sensations away, breathe into them and allow them to be present. Often, when we stop resisting these feelings and simply let them exist, they begin to transform on their own. After 2 weeks of basic practice, begin to explore the difference between loneliness and aloneness more directly. When feelings of loneliness arise during your sessions, instead of immediately wanting to escape or distract yourself, pause and investigate the feeling closely. What exactly is this sensation? What do you feel in your body? What thoughts accompany it? What is it that feels lonely, and what is it that's aware of the loneliness? This investigation will reveal something profound. There's a part of you that experiences loneliness, and there's a part of you that observes the experience of loneliness. The observer is never lonely. It's simply aware of whatever is present, including the experience of loneliness. As you become more familiar with this observing awareness, you'll begin to identify less with the part that gets lonely and more with the part that remains stable and present regardless of what's being experienced. Discovering the fullness of silence. During your 3rd week of practice, begin to work specifically with silence. Instead of just sitting alone, create periods of complete external and internal silence. This means not only avoiding external sounds and distractions, but also learning to quiet the internal dialogue that usually fills your mental space. Start with just 5 minutes of intentional silence within your longer alone sessions. In these moments of silence, you'll initially encounter what feels like emptiness or void. The mind, accustomed to constant activity, interprets this silence as nothingness and may react with fear or discomfort. But if you stay present with the silence instead of immediately filling it with thoughts or seeking distractions, you'll begin to discover that this apparent emptiness is actually incredibly full. It's pregnant with potential, alive with awareness, and complete in itself. Practice distinguishing between dead silence and living silence. Dead silence feels empty, boring, or oppressive. It's the ego's interpretation of the absence of stimulation. Living silence feels vibrant, peaceful, and nourishing. It's the direct experience of pure awareness without objects. As you become more familiar with living silence, you'll find that it doesn't need to be filled with anything because it's already complete. During the 4th week, extend your periods of silence and begin to notice how silence affects your relationship with thoughts and emotions. In living silence, thoughts and emotions don't disappear, but they lose their compulsive quality. They arise and pass away like clouds in an empty sky, without disturbing the fundamental peace and completeness of the silence itself. You begin to realize that you are not your thoughts and emotions. You're the silent awareness in which they appear. This discovery is transformative because it reveals that your essential nature is not dependent on any particular mental or emotional content. Whether you're thinking or not thinking, feeling happy or sad, experiencing excitement or boredom, the silent awareness remains unchanged. This awareness is what you truly are, and it's never lonely because it's never separate from anything. Embracing solitude as spiritual practice. After a month of basic practice, begin to approach your alone time as a form of spiritual practice. Not in a religious sense, but as a direct exploration of your deepest nature. Set aside longer periods, perhaps an hour or more, for deep solitude. During these extended sessions, you're not trying to achieve anything or get anywhere. You're simply resting in your own being, allowing yourself to discover what you are when all the external props and internal narratives are set aside. In these deeper sessions, You may encounter what mystics have called the dark night of the soul, periods of intense emptiness, meaninglessness, or existential confusion. This is often the ego's final attempt to reassert itself by creating dramatic experiences that demand attention and interpretation. Instead of getting caught up in these experiences or trying to figure out what they mean, simply remain present with them. They're like storms that pass through the sky of awareness, intense but temporary. As you continue this practice, you'll begin to notice that your relationship with other people starts to change. Instead of relating to others from a place of need, dependency, or the desire for validation, you begin to relate from a place of fullness and freedom. Your interactions become more authentic because you're not trying to get anything from others or present yourself in any particular way. You're simply present, and this presence is naturally attractive and nourishing to others. This doesn't mean you become antisocial or stop enjoying the company of others. Rather, you begin to appreciate others from a place of choice rather than compulsion. You enjoy connection when it's present, but you don't suffer when it's absent. You can be fully engaged in relationships while maintaining your inner completeness and independence. The ultimate goal of this practice is not to become comfortable with being alone, but to discover that you were never actually alone to begin with. True aloneness reveals that the sense of being a separate individual who can be isolated from others is itself an illusion. When this illusion dissolves, what remains is not a person who is alone, but pure awareness that is the common ground of all experience, yours and everyone else's. The pathless path home, the journey from loneliness to true aloneness, is not really a journey at all. It's a recognition of what has always been present, like a person searching everywhere for their glasses while wearing them. We seek completion in others while already being complete. We fear isolation while never having been separate. We run from silence while being made of the very stillness we're avoiding. This recognition doesn't come through effort or achievement, but through a kind of gentle surrendering, a letting go of the stories, strategies, and struggles that keep us trapped in the illusion of separation. It's like relaxing a muscle you didn't know you were tensing, or setting down a burden you forgot you were carrying. Suddenly, there's space where there was constriction, ease where there was effort, wholeness where there was fragmentation. The beautiful paradox is that in discovering true aloneness, you become more available for authentic connection with others. When you're no longer seeking completion through relationships, you can meet others as they are rather than as you need them to be. When you're not trying to fill an inner emptiness through external means, you have something genuine to offer. Your presence becomes a gift rather than a demand. Your love becomes unconditional rather than transactional. This is the secret that solitude teaches. You are not a separate wave seeking other waves for completion, but the ocean itself, temporarily experiencing itself as individual expressions. In this recognition, loneliness becomes impossible, not because you're never alone, but because you realize you're never anything but whole.